Well, Mark, the great opportunity for the United States at the end of the Cold War was to consolidate the Atlantic. I've said this in speech after speech. I said it to Bill Clinton. I said it to economic advisors foreign policy advisors since. When the Cold War finished, when the wall came down, when Gorbachev left and what was his name? The new president took over. The Americans had a real chance of bringing Russia into Europe, and if not into the EU, into some operating closeness with Europe, having some understanding that in the end, China, with a population 4 times that of the United States, will end up being, again, the central power in Asia. So if you wanted to balance off American power in the world, you would have consolidated Europe. You had the United States itself, Canada and Mexico. You had the European economy, which is about 30 trillion today. You had NATO as it stood. The great challenge was to bring Russia into Europe. What did they do? They did exactly the wrong thing, you know, led by that fellow, name escapes me now, it'll come to me in a second. They couldn't resist putting Hungary, Poland, the Czech Republic into NATO, then the Baltic states. NATO's border from Moscow was 1,200 miles away before the wall came down. It's 71 miles away now. The Russians have hated it. Of course, the northern European plain, which is as flat as a tack, runs from the north of France to St. Petersburg and to Moscow. I mean, Bonaparte went over it, Hitler went over it, and the Red Army came back over it into Berlin. There are no mountains, there are no big rivers. It is not protectable. Instead of that, no, what's the United States do? It bites off bits of the pie crust, so it annoys every Russian nationalist. And even though the Americans didn't create Putin, they did a very big job in lifting Putin to the position he is in now. Putin commands Russian nationalism in the scale of these losses, of these lost territories. Now, they were never to be part of the old Soviet Union. That was gone. But the bridging land between Germany and Russia, that is Poland, Hungary, these countries, could have been left in the into the EU. The challenge was to get them into the EU, not into NATO. And so the Americans made it, you know, probably the greatest post-war blunder in the extension of NATO, thereby denying and making much harder, and perhaps later bringing Russia into Europe. If Russia was in Europe, and there was a much better intra-European relationship than now with France and Germany, and the United States, you look at the US, 20-odd trillion of GDP, Europe 30 trillion of GDP, throwing Mexico and Canada, you're about 40 trillion of GDP. Even the Chinese at the best are going to get to 20, in the long run 40. So in other words, if you were the United States and you wanted your centre of power, you would have had it in the Atlantic. Instead of that, the United States is still pretending it can be the security guarantor of Asia. Not just the Atlantic, of Asia, despite the fact that China is already 1.25 times larger and will soon be 2 times larger. You know, so what it should be is this: the United States should be the guarantor and the leader of the West. It should, in East Asia, be the balancer and the conciliator. In other words, it's important to have American military power in Asia to deal with any pushiness by other states, including China, as the balancing and conciliating power. But the idea that we can maintain, that America can maintain strategic primacy in Asia, which was what the pivot was all about. I mean, the reason I hopped into Gillard and into Obama at the time and Hillary Clinton is that they believed, you know, against all the odds, that the United States could command 3 oceans, including the Western Pacific, and be the predominant military power in Asia, despite the fact that China was then nearly the same size as the United States and soon to be larger. So that's how I see it. That's how I see it. I think the opportunity of bringing Russia into Europe still exists, in which case Europe becomes a pole, a P-O-L-E, a pole. China will be a pole, but the United States trying to command both poles off an economy which is half the size of China and a quarter the size of its population is, of course, just wishful thinking.